We are now in chapter 4 of Desjardins' Introduction to Business, and the topic of the chapter is toxic business culture. Let's go into aspect 1 of it. Here we have a discussion of toxic culture, why toxic culture is bad for business, and why toxic culture is immoral, using Kantian, utilitarian, and virtue ethics moral frameworks that we have previously developed. The topic of this presentation is ethical corporate culture. The topic is introduced with the example of Greg Smith. He was once the CEO of Goldman Sachs, but had quit due to what he described as a toxic culture there. He was referring to that employees had lost a view of any kind of values. They cheered each other on in maximizing profits for the company by any means possible, including the sale of investment products that the clients either did not need or that were actually bad for the clients. That behavior was openly encouraged and approved by the management. The clients were openly referred to as Muppets, and the discussion among employees and management was of ripping them off. That is the toxic corporate culture. Greg Smith left Goldman Sachs because of the toxic work culture there. On this toxic model, it was believed to be normal to rip off clients to generate profits for the company, sell them products they do not need, sell them products they need at excessive prices, and so on. Greg Smith contrasted the toxic culture to another model of business that we may call the win-win model of doing business. On the win-win model, a company makes profits by offering innovative and useful products to its clients. As clients compensate and reward the company for the products that are beneficial to them. That is the win-win model of business. Right? This was Greg Smith. Whatever happened to the time when we used to sell innovative and beneficial products to the clients? That kind of doing business made good moral sense. And all we seem to do now is sell them things they don't really need, or sell it to them at the prices that are not reasonable. In other words, ripping them off, right? That is the toxic model of doing business. And there's a whole culture that enables it and surrounds it. The rip-off model may seem and be easier to execute in the short run. Innovation is not easy and is hard work, after all. But the rip-off model and the accompanying toxic culture is neither sustainable nor ethical. How long until clients leave and until excessively risky behaviors end the firm? How long until clients move on to firms that outcompete the rip-off firms? Due to that, these other and better firms offer products that are innovative, ethical, and beneficial. So we get the sense that the toxic culture and the rip-off model are just not good for the business. Toxic culture discussed above drives clients away, makes the firm engage in excessively risky behaviors, do anything to maximize profits, and drives away employees looking for good places of work, as well as promotes uncooperation and backstabbing among employees inside the firm. The employees are taught that human beings are simply looking out for their own benefits and will stop at nothing to gain them. That is going to be the attitude that the employees take toward clients, everyone else, as well as the firm itself. So they will backstab their colleagues and perhaps even steal from the firm itself, so long as they see that kind of behavior as beneficial. Those are not the kinds of employees that a firm would want. Nothing like loyalty or accountability can be expected from employees for whom extremely self-interested and self-centered behavior of the most ruthless kind is modeled by the firm. These are not the kind of employees that a wise CEO or business manager would want to work with. There's no loyalty to or any genuine concern for the well-being of the firm to be expected from this kind of employees. Let us now discuss why the toxic culture is immoral. Not simply bad for business, as we have previously discussed, but immoral. Toxic culture does not respect clients, employees, or anyone else as ends in themselves. The members of the toxic culture treat everyone as merely a tool or an instrument for maximizing benefits to those members. Thus, autonomy of persons is not respected in a Kantian fashion. Remember, Kantian ethics are about viewing each human being as free and autonomous and respecting the decisions they make for themselves. Well, toxic culture does the exact opposite, right? Since people would choose for themselves to get products that are beneficial. But the message of the toxic culture is we should act in ways that sell and get people sell to and get people to buy products that are not beneficial to them. That's not respecting their rational, autonomous choices for themselves. It would also seem that this kind of behavior does not maximize happiness for the largest number of persons, but only for those who are employed in the toxic culture, right? There are all these unhappy clients that have been ripped off for the sake of the few employees of the firm. That does not make utilitarian sense, on which the moral action is the one that maximizes benefits for as many human beings as possible. That is the utilitarian way in which the toxic culture is not moral. Virtue ethics, our third moral framework, goes further and claims that even the members of the toxic culture themselves cannot be happy in the toxic culture. They get into habits of acting in ways that would make it difficult to have genuine, deep, and fulfilling relationship with others. They become persons who are greedy, backstabbing, self-centered, suspicious, and untrusting of others. Spineless, untrustworthy, immoderate, lacking in courage to do what they know is right. These are not going to be the people that live happy and meaningful and fulfilling lives. Remember that the thesis of virtue ethics is that a person becomes what they do, and the more they do it, the more they become it. That's the notion of character that virtue ethics introduces us to. The very question of business culture comes from the standpoint of virtue ethics, as the presumption of virtue ethics is that persons become what they do. But what persons do depends to a significant extent on the beliefs and values that they share with others. In other words, it depends on what is promoted by the culture that the persons are within. The thesis of virtue ethics is that we are creatures of habit, and we are also creatures that are social. Thus, we internalize and practice those habits and beliefs that are repeated around us and are, so to speak, in the air around us in the culture, especially if they are reinforced by rewards and punishments within that culture, or in our case, toxic corporate culture. That is unlike the Kantian belief that we are all individuals with free will and choose for ourselves, not simply do what the culture within which we are embedded tells us to do. This virtue ethics thesis is also unlike the utilitarian belief that we are creatures of nature who simply aim to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Right? So you're not really going to get a discussion of the ethics of culture on the Kantian model because there each one of us is simply a free will individual, nor you're going to get a discussion of culture on the utilitarian model because there we are simply beings of nature and aim to maximize pleasure and decrease suffering. But virtue ethics is precisely the right ethical model by which to address whether the culture that is repeated by persons in it is ethical or not.